So again, welcome everyone to our webinar today. We are covering the site description. That's kind of one part in the series we did earlier this year, mostly focused in protocols of looking at the your treatment editor and the protocol description, and we kind of are going editor by editor, if you will, within ARM. And today's focus is the site description. And admittedly, as I got prepared for this session, I was a little surprised at how many different sections we have within that site description. There's a lot to cover. So, like I said, going to go kind of quickly through these topics because there's just so many and they're all in different areas. But again, that's what's great about asking questions. Slow me down where it is of most interest to us. Like I said, we're just going to go kind of section by section. I have quite a few slides. We'll still pop into ARM when we want to play around with something, but there's just so many different configurations and things. It's hard to get everything into even one ARM file, much less being able to talk through it all. So I'm going to start on the general trial tab. Is kind of the very first one up, and there's kind of a couple of different things that I think are worth highlighting. Here, let me just start in ARM and get me to that spot so we can kind of hop back and forth from the screen. So the site description, of course, has all these different tabs. We call them different sections, trying to categorize the great many different metadata, I guess, if you will. It's not the assessments you take, but it's everything else that you'd want to record about a trial. And we'll start here on the general trial and the trial status. I think I kind of like to point that one out. So let's go back to the slides. Not a whole lot to talk about, but it is important because it creates a timeline of the different stages of a trial. And really the purpose in me pointing this out is because it is very important as it relates to study rules, as it relates to your validation. So just being aware that as the trial progresses, it is good to make sure that status reflects where the trial is at. Now, there's 9 options here, but if you look a little closer, it really isn't that sophisticated as far as you're not having to update the status every other day or anything like that. The trial just kind of moves from a setup where maybe we haven't taken any action yet within the trial. We're still just planning out where it might land. That's where it starts when you generate from a protocol to a trial. But then once some action occurs, if it's a planting date, if it's a treatment application, whatever it is, it should move on to established. And then once things start moving on, then interim, whether the trial is a 1-year or a multi-year, you would be an interim. So that's a big wide net. Whenever things are going on, then it could be an interim. And then once you're ready to finalize, you would pop down to the final selection. And again, the important thing just is you might have rules, requirements that are timed to some extent. You don't need to put in the harvest date until the very end of the season. So maybe that requirement isn't triggered until you set it to final. So that's really why it's worth pointing out. Keep that status just in mind as the trial progresses. Also on that general trial tab is your GPS coordinates. So just being able to put down your trial location. And we have a tool that goes alongside that. So if you click the little tool icon next to the GPS coordinate value, you can draw the coordinates that are entered onto a simple Google map or Bing map. I think Bing is the one we use by default. And it's just to help visualize those coordinates, just to check the accuracy, right? If you do, here's my example. If there is an error, you accidentally have a negative in one of them, or you forget the negative and suddenly your coordinate is in the middle of the ocean. This is just a nice way to catch that because just the numbers on the screen might not be super obvious. So here it draws out either just the lower left corner, can be what's drawn, or it might be all four if you filled all four of them in. And so this is just kind of an extreme example. If you put a negative, suddenly your rectangle is going to be extremely large, half the size of the globe. So you can catch those types of oopsies before moving on. That's about it for that first section. Let me switch to ARM just so we can visually move along. So we did the trial location, not a whole lot else that is super significant there. So we'll move to the next group called regulations. There's a variety of things here, but I'm going to focus on this first section with your GEP certificate in your test facility. So the idea here, oh, and my screenshot is incorrect because we've moved that all to the regulations tab. So these fields related to your test facility and your accreditation number with GEP, that is on the regulations tab, but it comes from your user profile. So the reason that is really your facility, all these GEP certificate is more about the user of the software, not specific to each individual trial, right? So here it makes more sense to fill those information in once in ARM in your profile, which you can find under the help menu. There's a tab for certificates, and you can fill in. Of course, this is all fake because GDM, we don't do any actual research, but for real research groups, you would put in your GEP details here with your test facility, your accreditation number, and the link to that certificate. And that's saved in your profile. So when you open a trial, it can stamp that information into the trials that you are working on. We won't go through too much of the workflow with this, but the big thing just to note kind of that slightly different dynamic that it comes from your profile instead of having to hand fill it in each and every time. And it does actually make an attachment. That PDF certificate that you have actually becomes a quote unquote physical attachment to your trial. So that way it's easy to move along with the trial. You have that documentation handy. Okay, moving on to the next section after regulations is the objectives and conclusions. And so for quite a long time, there was just those two sections. There's really just two boxes on that tab. Those boxes are large, so just pausing for a moment, we call those types of fields. I'll go back to ARM here to click into one. We call these rich text fields. It's almost like a miniature Word document stuffed right in to that field itself. And so you have the ability to format the text, change the size of it, add a table, bullet points. You have some pretty basic formatting functionality to these types of fields. Really handy for if you have your protocol is written in a Word document or a PDF document, something like that you can then copy that formatted document style information and just paste it right into these boxes. And then it also kind of makes a nice report later on. If you print out this section of the report, that formatting can be there in the ARM report as well. So this contains, your overall objectives, of course, of the trial, and then at the end you can fill in your conclusions for the trial. little more recently, we added two more fields, the materials and methods, which is just copied from, I can go back to the slides here probably for these two. That just copies from your protocol instructions. The idea is, okay, we'll take that template of what the instructions were from the protocol. Let's duplicate that here, and now the trialist can update those contents with what actually occurred. So you still have that dynamic of, we had a plan, but then things happen. This is what actually took place. You have two different boxes then for that information. So the materials and methods then can be updated and tweaked to say this is truly what happened. And then it's easy to compare with the stamped in instructions, which we'll see later on is archived at the very end of the site description. And then the results were added just from a legal department more than anything to state, hey, if you can't legally draw conclusions from a trial, maybe you need to just state results instead. So that slight difference in what you're doing in the end. It's nice to have that section to utilize. All right, the next section, we'll go back to ARM here, is the contacts. And this makes for a good example of, I usually call them multi-field personal lists. So you have each contact within the trial. We have different roles. There's a study director and an investigator, your sponsor, the cooperator, and all sorts of other ones. In fact, if you wanted to add other types of contacts as it relates to your trial. But for each one of those, of course, you have multiple things that, aspects, attributes of this contact, their name, the company address, all of these bits are all tied back together to this one person, this one contact. And so the main, usually the first field, whatever the name or the ID field in that group, that'll contain this list that actually has all the different fields in one table. So I can fill that contact information in one time, in one trial, and then let me add all those details into my personal list on my computer. So now I have me at this company in my investigator list. So the next trial that I'm working on, it's very easy to insert these details once again. I don't have to type them all in. I can just bring up the list from the investigator name and copy all those details in all of these different fields in one go. So a pretty big time saver, I think. So it's real nice to show that. And the only trick, it might not be super obvious. Some of these, you just pop open that main list, so it's not too hard to find, but other things like your country, of course, isn't tied. So you just want to make sure to find that kind of top level or the first field in that group. And that's where that all comes into play. So I think contacts is a very good example of this concept of a multi-field list. There's some other ones we'll try to point out too as we go through. We'll see it on the application equipment section and also the general equipment area as well. But I find it to be just a real big time saver, right? Just entering that information into every one of your trials when it's the same thing over and over again is just not necessary. Leverage the list from ARM. ARM can hold on to those details and let you implement it again and again and again instead of having to hand type. Okay, next section would be both our crops and pests. Those two kind of pair together nicely. And one big difference we'll see on the screen there in the crop and the pest description is there's this function called the quick view. So most especially in the crop description, there is a lot of fields and they kind of have different functions. So we found there's really different groups of fields depending on what type, what information or what aspect or what time of the year we're talking about. So it made it easy to simplify and change the view on the screen based on whatever you wanted to see. And this one's hard to capture in a screenshot, so let's switch back to ARM to kind of just demonstrate here on the crop description. When I'm in my original view, there, like I said, lots of information about one singular crop. And then especially if maybe I have multiple varieties in my study, I might have several of these sections. So it becomes pretty hard to look at and scroll through. So these quick views will quickly hide fields that aren't in the kind of predefined category. In this case, if I click on variety, we're going to show only the fields that we have related to variety. And then if I click on treatment, it'll add in some more. So you can see they both now are selected. So I can see both variety and treatment related fields. We can turn off variety by clicking on that. We can see there's just a couple that are related to the treatment. So it's a pretty quick and easy way to shrink down what you're looking at, be a little more focused. And then if I just unclick or click back on original, I get right back to where I was. So just trying to simplify this screen. It's kind of the one thing. ARM's so powerful, so many things you can do with it, but there's so much then on the screen blasting at you. So these types of shortcuts can just make it a lot easier to focus in on what today's task is. Okay, I've got harvest information to put in. I'll just click on harvest, and now I can really focus on the details that I want to fill in and not have to scroll so much through everything. Same idea on the pest description. It's not quite as huge, but we did find kind of 3 different categories, which can be handy to shrink things down. And this kind of highlights that grouping mechanism. There is a button to expand or collapse. Let me go back to make these big so you can collapse them down a little bit. The pest isn't too obnoxious anyway, but definitely useful for the crop. If I go back to that full length, then this just trims it down a little bit so I can see multiple repeating sections at a time. And there's also shortcut buttons over here for copying the repeating sections, so copying all of those details or deleting it. And there's a little warning icon here because it knows that I've also filled in information about this crop in other areas of ARM. So it's warning me, wait a minute, if you delete this, you're also going to lose those details on the crop staged application. Or if I had assessment data that I linked to this crop, same thing. So I'll say no. Right, so that's the quick view toolbar. Another topic here related to your crops and pests, I just like to point out this study rule. Won't spend too much time on rules, but I think this one is just so powerful and it really fits with this idea in your site description of making sure you document the details about the crops or the varieties that you're studying and or the pests target that you have for that research. And especially how that might link with the assessments that you perform. So if you turn on this limit validation list study rule, or in the assessment data tab of your study rules editor, there's just a little box you can click to limit the assessment crop and pest list to items that you have selected in the site description. So basically, this just enforces a link. So when you're in the assessment editor, filling in the crop or the pest for a particular assessment, you don't get the full EPO library of all the pests in the world. Instead, you only see the ones that have been defined in this one trial. So my screenshot here, I'm choosing a weed for my assessment. I only see the 3 that are defined in that one trial. So it enforces that link. That way there are no accidents. Oops, I picked the wrong pest. I just chose the wrong code on accident. It's also just a time saver from the assessment standpoint of I don't have to wade through that huge list. It's short and sweet. There's just the ones I have. And it can kind of prompt trialists as well. Maybe there was an unexpected pest that needed to be rated. If it's not in this list, there's just a button here to click on for new, and it will force them to add a new repeating section in your pest description, crop description, I guess, in the pest description for that the other weed or the other disease or whatever was found. So that way it kind of goes both ways. If you did take an assessment on something new, make sure you get that into the site description. Make sure we fill in all the details that we require about that target. All right. Last but not least, in this little section with crops, something new in this most recent version, this most recent year, I guess I should say, of ARM, the crop, we added a pick list for your varieties. So within a crop code that you have chosen, you can also put in a variety and save a bunch of details, whatever details you might care about to save with that particular variety. So highlighted on the screen is that button floating right above the crop code itself that, once again, just like we saw previously with the contacts, if you fill in all of your details and then you go back to open up that list, then it'll add it to your personal list. I'll show that real quickly here, the crop variety list. And again, mine's empty. Let me say no real quick so I can just bring this down. So the variety details for my soybean, I didn't fill in many other things, but you can see in these columns, I could have quite a few details if I wished. But if I just go ahead and click on that and add it to my list here, the next time I'm working with this variety of soybean, it'll be easy to add. Or even if I were to just insert, let me insert another repeating section. So when it's empty, I can just click on that list and fill in that variety real quick. Okay. So that's it for the main crop and pest description. The next tab is site and design. Not a whole lot of interesting tools there in the site and design. The one thing I think worth pointing out would be the field called experimental unit. And that unit that you put in there, if you choose to fill that field in, that can override what ARM calls a plot. So historically, ARM originated in just field trials. We've worked to generalize it for all sorts of different types of research. But some of that kind of original terminology still sticks around. I think plot is a pretty obvious example of that. When in general, the most general term would be experimental unit, but of course that's big and bulky, and so places in ARM where we would label experimental units is a lot, right? So we usually just use plot. If you fill in this experimental unit, then even just on the various interface places in ARM in this one trial, that word plot can be replaced by that description there, that experimental unit. So here in my screenshots show that working with an orchard study, and my plot really is just a tree. Now, across ARM, whether it's in the assessment data section or different report options, or buttons, we're actually changing that word, hopefully just to make it a little more natural feeling. You don't have to have that mental leap between plot and tree or whatever you're working on. Just kind of an interface thing. It doesn't change much else about the trial or functionality other than just kind of what you're looking at. Okay, the next section, let's go back to ARM quick here. So we did crop and pest, the site and design, pretty short and sweet. The maintenance section, that is pretty much a miniature treatments editor at this point, but of course used to document whatever maintenance products would be applied over the course of the trial. Any product that goes on all of the plots, across the whole field, for maintenance of any sort, really. It's very much like the treatments editor. We really have just about everything like in the treatments editor, or whatever you might want to describe, to have all that documentation of what else was applied. But again, the key is that goes on all of the plots. So it's not part of the experimental design. It's not things we're investigating, but of course it definitely is part of the trial. It's part of what occurred, just uniformly for all of the plots. So it's not part of your treatment. And kind of what I wanted to show on the PowerPoint slide is just point out some new development that is actually brand new in the 2025.4. You can sort the certain repeating sections. So if you have across really any of these site description sections, if you have a table where you add rows, so the main component, the repeating portion of your table is the row. We added the ability to sort that table based on the contents of whichever column you want to sort by. And the important thing to note is this isn't just like a temporary view that we change the order just for the moment so you can see and review. It actually is reordering the sections. It changes the order of the repeating sections based on how you've chosen to sort. So here the example, which is one of the main examples given with this request, was the maintenance, where maybe the products kind of get put in willy-nilly, kind of however the trialist thinks to put them in, but boy, it'd be nice in the end to sort them chronologically, for example. And that's what I have here on the left. They are put in from different dates, and I'd really like to just rearrange them so they look nice and chronological. So I right-click in the date column and sort, and now those repeating sections have been moved around in their entirety, so that way they are in order, in this case chronologically. But if I wanted to sort them by the product name, so they were in alphabetical order, I could do that if I just right-clicked in the name column instead. So kind of the prominent examples where I think this would be useful and in tables with this structure would be in your protocols trial location table, the weather and the controlled environment that we'll talk about here real soon. Those can be rearranged, and then this maintenance tab as well. All of those would be the type of table where you can do this, and I think where there could be some logic where it would make sense, you might want to. So that's something new here, ARM. Another new function is on our next tab, which is the soil. Soil description, I think is what we call it at the very top. So something new added somewhat recently is we used to just call it the measured elements table, but beefed it up a little bit, generalized it a little to be measured properties. So the goal is, especially with like biologicals and other types of research that are a little more prominent nowadays, there might be a lot of different things you're wanting to record or capture about the soil. And previously, we just had very simple elements. It was just phosphorus or calcium. Well, there's actually quite a few other things you might want to record. And if you only take like one sample for across the trial, it's not at each plot, but I just want to capture just one sample for the soil here at the trial site, it doesn't make sense to put that in an assessment column. So we've beefed up this table in the soil description to be able to record a lot more details, different things that you might be rating about the soil, but just at the trial site instead of plot specific. So just some examples, temperature, moisture, water holding capacity, those are all new. In addition to, we still have all the other elements as well in that list. We also put in a source field if you want to document the source of that measurement too. But the idea, just let me switch to ARM real quick. It is a table that was already there at the bottom here, but now we've just called it the measured soil properties. So you specify the property that you looked at, then you have the value recorded and the unit. You can optionally identify the depth at which you took it. And now it's a repeating section, or it already was a repeating section, but being a repeating section, then you can have multiple properties and multiple dates too. If you come back and take multiple samples, you can just continue to add to this table for all of those samples. So that's the soil tab. Looking at the weather section, this one we've in some ways covered fairly well in a recent webinar. So if you do want to go back, you can watch that for a lot more details on how to work with this section. So I won't spend very much time. The idea, of course, is just to capture the environment weather details over the course of the trial. There's a lot of information that can be recorded. Most often, most helpful, you're getting the data from some sort of weather station. And so we have a whole system where you can connect and import weather information. So we spent, like I said, a whole webinar. Go ahead and check that out, or how to work with this section and define that connection. Going to pop back one spot here since I missed the question back here on the soil section about the properties to record. So yeah, we demonstrated this in the protocol description webinar, so I kind of glossed over it. The idea with the soil properties to record is you can plan out the whole set of properties that you might be getting in one reading, and that makes it easy to then take multiple readings. So I'll just go through and pick out a few of these. So like every time I'm going to go and take a sample, I know I'm going to record, want to record these 4 different attributes. And so this table is just strictly for planning. Okay, so I'm going to take to be honest, I didn't even pay attention. Potassium, I didn't pay attention to what I picked, but I'll just assume they're all in milligrams, even though that's probably dreadfully wrong. But let's just choose the unit for each of these as well. The idea with this table is to create the template. Okay, every time I take a soil reading, it's going to have those details. And that'll set me up now throughout the trial. Maybe we're going to take 3 or 4 soil samples throughout the season to keep tabs on these details. And so by filling in this table, it helps us automate the actual recording of that data each time we take a sample. So I can insert soil records with this button here, and then it takes that plan and has all 4 of those to say, okay, I'm going to record all 4 of these details. What's the date of our sample? Okay, that's today. If I want to, I can put in the depth of, how, oh, that'd be really deep, how deep we are going. And then there's also a comment. So we're going to pre-fill all of these details, and we're going to add 4 soil records. So they're kind of trying to automate, since it's going to get pretty old pretty quickly, especially if there's 10 or a dozen properties that I want to record, filling in those same details every single time. And then every time I have a sample, we're just trying to save some time. So now all I have to do is fill in my readings from whatever report or PDF or whatever I'm given. And then again, a week later, I can come back, new report from the lab because we took another sample. I can just repeat. I'll insert more records. This time it's a week later, and it inserts new records so I can fill in the new values. So that's the idea why this table exists, trying to automate that a little bit. Again, most useful just if you're taking multiple samples of soil details throughout the season is really where it would matter much at all. Or protocol wise, if you wanted to just communicate to the trialist, I want you to fill in these properties. I want you to record all of this. Maybe it is only once, just depending on what matters, but it would be a way to communicate. These are the ones I care about, and this would be the unit I would expect them to be in. Great question. Another question here, the difference between description name and soil name. Let's see. So I've got the description name here. Oh, and soil name. So I'm kind of cheating and using the tooltip here. So as I hover over the field, or I could press the F5 key, or this little help button at the top, if you want to try to know a little more. So soil name we have described as a category for the soil type. So we have the very specific clay loam texture. This name You can tell I'm not a researcher, so I'm struggling to come up with a good example for the soil name. But in contrast with that, the description is really our headliner to save all of these details into the list. So the description name in some ways doesn't matter in that idea. It's really just a way for you to create a list item for ARM to remember these soil details. So that way, each time, each trial that you put at this location can have those same details and it remembers it. So description, not super research oriented. It'd just be an overall way for you to create an item in your list. Whereas I do think the soil name would be a little bit more agricultural oriented. Again, the limits to the research I've done, I can't come up with a good example, but what you might be trying to categorize for this type of soil. Hopefully that kind of helps there. I'm a little limited on what that soil name might be. We've already got the very specific texture, which was the first thing that came to my mind. But you might have a more general name or category that you want, and it's free text. You'll notice there is no defined structure here. So to give some flexibility in what category you might want to have it fit into, if you're going to summarize later, I would think would be the reason that would matter a lot. Yeah, a good comment with that description name. It might make sense to be your site, because that would be kind of the association you would make to choose from this list, right? So yeah, this site here, oh, this is my bricking site here. That's my town here. If I was doing research on at my house, it'd be my bricking site. These are all the details for that. So that's how I would categorize it in my mind and know which one to pick, right? When I'm working in ARM, or which location does all of these soil details relate to. Yeah, so I think that site would be probably what you would put into your description name, which of course would not have any bearing on a description of the soil itself. So hopefully that helps. All right, great questions here on the soil section. Like I said, it does definitely seem that a lot more popular section of the site description than it was even 5-10 years ago. Just at least as far as the questions and requests we have, how that goes. So cool to see the industry, how that changes, kind of matches up with things we hear and need in the software. Okay, next section is the controlled environment. Previously, we had called it the greenhouse section, but recently we've kind of tweaked it a little bit to be a little more general, because of course it's not just greenhouses. There might be all sorts of growth chambers and in general just environments that you can control, right? And so you may want to document that said environment that you have control over. Now that's totally different types of information that you would record. It's no longer about the sun intensity, but it would be the lights. What kind of light did we run, and what did we choose for the intensity of the light that we can now control? So just different set of information, but in general, the same idea as the weather tab, as far as just let's document the conditions under which the whole trial took place under. So this section, really to fill it in, you really work hand in hand with the tab called Equipment. So you would go to the Equipment tab first and define your growth chamber or your greenhouse, whatever the piece of equipment, if you think of that chamber as a piece of equipment, let's document that first in the equipment section. All the details, what is the type of chamber, what you can put in the trade name, who makes it, what is the model number, all these different details, whatever would matter to document about that entity, that piece of equipment. Once that is documented in the trial, then in the controlled environment section, we simply create a link. So you filled in the growth chamber details, oops, then we really are just going to create a link to all of those details. So that way we're not duplicating that. I don't have to put in all of that information, the trade name and the model number for every single daily record for this growth chamber. That would be way excessive. So trying to simplify the load of how much information gets put in by creating that linkage. And then it's the same idea. So here, maybe a little bit better screenshot to show with the equipment number 1, you'd fill in all of those details, put in your method or subtype as whatever type of controlled environment it might be. Then when we're ready to put in daily records, you simply bring up the list of equipment, and ARM will filter for only things that have a controlled environment type. And I can choose that one growth chamber that I have. So now I simply refer to my Brookings walk-in growth chamber, which, like I said, I defined in my equipment section. And then, of course, the idea you want to use that list. So let me go back one slide. When I fill in that growth chamber details, I only want to fill that in once. I don't want to put that in for every trial that I perform with that growth chamber. So just like we have in a bunch of other sections, you want to put that in your list. So fill it in, come back to that top level equipment name field, and when you bring up the list, it'll ask you and add it to your personal list of equipment. So again, save me time. The next trial I come to, I don't have to type that information in again. So again, we're just defining a link. Same idea with the light. So now there's light information if you need to record the lighting in your greenhouse. Again, define in the equipment that light piece. Then when you're going to record the daily entry of what was the intensity or what have you, you simply link to that light. This was the one that was on. This is the intensity it was at for that one day. Same thing with irrigation. So there's another whole section in the controlled environment tab for irrigation, all the details about your irrigation, but we can tie that to the piece of equipment that is that irrigator. So trying to fill things in fewer times, right? So it's almost acting like a relational database, if you will, but with the interface. So hopefully that makes sense. Trying to save some time, even if it feels like it seems convoluted when I have to like talk through it. But I think when you actually do the steps, it's very smooth, and it's saving time is the whole goal. So slide on the equipment. I feel like it kind of shows that in talking through the controlled environment, but you can use that equipment tab not just for your controlled environment details, but it could be for any piece of equipment used in the trial. So kind of the very first use case that we thought through in order to build out how many rows we would need was drones. You know, there's so many details about the drone and the cameras and the sensors and stuff that we thought that's the most complicated piece of equipment, at least from a how many things to document perspective. So we started there, built a bunch of fields, and then looked at other equipment and made sure we had all of our bases covered. So in all likelihood, you won't fill in every row for any particular given piece of equipment. Kind of the same as with everything in ARM, right? So many different aspects and things, they might not apply. But another use case for that equipment, in addition to the control environment, even in your assessment section, you can create a link to that piece of equipment. So there's an equipment field in your assessment, so you can reference what piece of equipment was used to perform that assessment. And here I'm carrying on that drone example, but it could be anything, any sort of piece of equipment that you use to make an assessment, you can link it, that documentation. Okay, I'm going to try to pick up the pace a little bit. We've only got a few more minutes. Looking at the applications section, a couple of tools that I wanted to highlight real briefly here. Assuming you have the application codes all planned out for the different events of actually, applying the different treatments. Sometimes you end up with a bunch of different codes just because there's slightly different ways the applications occurred. This is a shortcut to help save data entry time because maybe most of the details are the same as far as maybe all the weather details, right? Because it occurred at the same time, there was just different equipment, different methods involved. And so there is a copy button. I'll move on to this next slide here. There's a copy button right above the application, and you can bring those across. I think there's a short little video here that's maybe a little better. Right above the code, the application code, there's this button to copy, and it'll bring up a wizard. So we're not just copying that one, but it actually will bring up a wizard when you click on it, and it's this dialog here. And so it'll show, look, I copied A on the left. Now there's destinations. Do I want to copy those details into B and or C and or D? As I pick each one, it's going to show, it's going to preview. And you'll notice it never overwrites information that's already been entered. So it's just going to copy into blank fields. So you won't mess anything up by using this. It's a smart copy of only things that are empty. So things that are common across all those different codes. You can also do it for different sections. So here I'm showing the application equipment, but you could do it the same on the application tab, or your crop stage at application, or pest stage at application. Trying to just automate and save some time if there's several codes, that all occurred at the same day. On the flip side, if you can't perform the application, there is a designation. You can mark this not applied. And so that will kind of gray it out. Even though it was planned, I want to keep that documentation of this was the plan. Something happened and it just couldn't take place. And so that's a way to designate that. When you turn that on, a deviation automatically is generated. So then you can fill in the reason of why that happened. And then it kind of carries on throughout the rest of the trial. On a spray sheet, it'll cross out the application code. All of the calculations will adjust for taking that into account. Next topic, won't spend much time on it, the leaf wall area. Just know ARM does support the leaf wall area calculations, whether it's your treatment rate of application or your spray volume in terms of leaf wall area. The idea here is just if you have a three-dimensional crop, so there's that picture there, instead of having a rate based on your ground area, you really want to care about the area of the leaf wall. Because if your crop is only 1 foot tall or 4 feet tall, the amount of product you're spraying maybe should be different. And so that whole calculation system is something ARM does support. And there I've got the formula. It does pull in information from a couple different sections of the trial in order to generate that calculation. So there's a tool called the application plan. That's really nice because it pulls in everything that really goes into an LWA calculation. So it's nice to visualize or enter in that information all in one go. And that kind of covers, let me switch to ARM quick. That kind of covers the crop staged application. I thought that's kind of the one notable thing. We have a lot of that leaf wall area. There is also tree row volume, which is pretty similar concept as well that we have calculations for. Pest staged application, couldn't come up with anything too exciting to highlight there. We talked through the application equipment fairly well. I do like to point out that this is where your spray volume and your mix size, that's the best place to define it. Some trials, it's simple. It's the same for every application. So people are used to going to settings for that information. But really the best thing to do is put that in the application equipment, because then it's very clear for what application, what happened. And especially then, of course, for studies where those values differ by application event, then it's very obvious that that's where it needs to go. We talked through equipment, treatment application comments, pretty straightforward. If you just have a need to put in some comments and tie it back to a treatment as it pertains to, something that happened during application or something like that. There's a general notes section. ARM will add things to the notes, and they'll be in italics, and it'll always start with added by ARM when certain things happen through the trial, but you can always add your own notes as well. There's all sorts of categories for different things you might want to put in to document. If it's something significant as it pertains to the trial and its plan, there is a deviation section. So that's when something goes wrong, per se, and we had to deviate from the original plan. This is important to fill this out. Describe what happened and the reason for it. This is actually a repeating section, so you can create more than one of them as needed. Real quick here to wrap this up, SE definitions, a little more heavily covered in the protocol description as part of the plan, but from a kind of a trialist perspective, just know it's useful for your assessment description, actually. And this is where you can find a bunch of templates for describing assessments you've done. So in the SE definitions, you open up the field called SE name. That list has a master table of literally hundreds. I think we're getting close to 1,000 SEs, which are just templates for describing assessments. So that can be really great starting point to fill in assessments that you want to describe. So maybe more of a topic for the assessment editor, but just know that is found here in the site description. And last but not least, protocol instructions. These are read-only. These are rich text fields that came from the protocol. So all the different instructions that the protocol writer wanted to document, they are copied to each trial, and they are not editable. They are kind of permanently stamped in as this was the plan. And all of these other sections we've talked about, of course, are the ways to document what actually occurred. But this way we still retain those original plans, variety of different details here. Just to call out these instructions were the general protocol instructions. That's the source for way at the beginning when we were looking at the objectives and conclusions. Those protocol instructions are copied to the materials and methods. And this is editable. So now as a trialist, you can adjust to change up what was the plan. Nope, this is what actually took place. This happened, this, that, and whatever. it's editable here on the objectives and conclusions. All right, and that's a wrap on the site description. Said we had to go pretty fast, lots of different tools. If you run into something we didn't get to spend a lot of time on, feel free to reach out to us or your local representative, and we can help explain any of those tools in more details. So thanks everyone for your time, and hopefully we'll be seeing you again at another webinar.